I've made this trip so many times that I could probably put my truck on autopilot and still get here in one piece, but this trip was different. It usually took me a couple of hours. This time, however, I had to stop, gas up the truck, and buy a few more things along the way. This was an unplanned trip. The city has already had 3 snowfalls this year. There were 5 in the north where I was heading, totaling over 30 inches. I usually don't mind driving in the winter unless it's in heavy snow or black ice. But on this trip, I almost ended up in a ditch more than once, sliding sideways along the road. Normally, I would have put a couple 100 pounds of sand in the bed of my truck for better traction, but I didn't have time to do that. Okay, I'll grab a dozen bags of sand and de-icing salt as soon as I can. 3.5 hours later, I was driving through the main streets of Detroit Lakes. Normally, I would take a detour and skip the town, but for some unknown reason, I wanted to take a look before continuing north out of town. They seemed to be as affected by the economic situation as any other city in the state. Some shops remained the same, others had new owners, but there were many more empty ones than the last time I was in town. Driving slowly through the city center, I hoped to see a familiar face. Most people were too busy getting from point A to point B to even notice me. I only knew a couple of people in the city. Most of the people I knew who were my age had moved away a long time ago. Without a permanent job, there is no point in staying. Detroit Lakes was like any small northern town, surviving on the tourist trade of which there was little left. So, after driving from one end of town to the other, I headed my truck north again. I waved to my neighbor, Art Shui, as I slowly lowered the pickup down the shared driveway, parking it next to the side of my cabin. I was grateful that Art now lived here full-time because he took care of the road leading to our cabins. Otherwise, I would not have been able to navigate this winding dirt road without a 4-wheel drive vehicle, which my truck did not have. The snow was over 3 feet deep, but Art and his 4-wheel drive Ford F-250 with a shovel in front always made sure all the roads leading to the lake were cleared. Putting on a hat and gloves, I stepped out of the truck into the cold. I turned on the main breaker on the outside electrical panel, opened the hard valve on the propane tank, and finally turned on the water in the cabin. I returned to the truck to pick up one suitcase and a box of groceries I'd bought along the way before carefully walking up the snowy steps leading to the back door of the cabin. A quick turn of the key and I'm inside. I turned on the light switch by the back door, illuminating the kitchen and part of the dining room. I watched as my warm breath mixed with the icy air of the cabin, almost freezing as it left my mouth. Damn, it was cold. There seemed to be a thin layer of frost on everything. I walked over to the large heater in the dining room, lit the pilot wick, and waited a second or two before turning on the gas. A loud whoosh was the sound he fortunately made as the gas immediately ignited. I also turned on the heaters in the large bedroom and on the enclosed porch. I rubbed my cold bare hands together. It will take at least 20 minutes to get the hut warm enough to remove the heavy parka. Meanwhile, I laid out the food, hung up my clothes, and brought a few more things from my truck. There was no need to lock it. I knew that no one here would bother him. The cabin finally began to thaw, allowing me to take off my jacket and hang it on the rack by the heater in the dining room. Stepping onto the enclosed veranda, I looked out the partially cleaned windows. It really was beautiful here. As a child, I drew a happy face on the frost from inside one of the veranda windows and then erased it. There was nothing joyful. No one has been here in winter for 10 years. This was the year one of our friends flipped his snowmobile and broke his arm. This damn fool was driving across the lake and tried to jump over the snowdrift in front of our house. The car flew into the air, turned sideways in the air, and crashed right on top of him. After a quick trip to a small hospital downtown, he and everyone else headed back home to Minneapolis. My wife Mandy and I stayed an extra night and closed the cabin. That was the last time anyone used it after the first snowfall. That is, until now. Most of the lake houses were summer retreats. Besides Art, I can only think of 2 others that were busy year-round. Art used to live somewhere south of St. Cloud. When his wife of 55 years passed away a couple of years ago, he sold his house and moved all his belongings into his cabin. Art said he wanted to get away from it all, and here he had all the privacy he wanted. He was just over 75 years old, and it took us almost 2 years to convince him to install a telephone. I think he finally agreed only after Mandy, and I agreed to split the monthly expenses with him. At least his 3 children could now contact him. After 2 hours, the house was warm, and all the windows were clear enough to look through. I put on my jacket, pulled my hat back on, and took out the bag of birdseed that we kept in a box on the veranda. It took me about 15 minutes to fill about 8 feeders around the house. It didn't take long before they were filled with hungry birds. It was relaxing to watch them swoop in, grab a few grains, and fly off. Now I regretted that I had not thought to take my camera with me, not that I had thought much when I left. I spent the next hour staring out the wall of windows, relaxing in my big rocking chair. Placing my feet on the windowsill, I breathed a sigh of relief for the first time. No one could reach me here. I was in my fortress of solitude. Finally, I watched as the sun began to set, and within minutes, it was almost pitch black outside. I turned on the outside lights, illuminating the yard and the narrow path to the lake. I walked around the house twice before deciding I needed to eat something. A lot of time has passed, and the cold always makes me hungry. Breakfast sounded tempting to me. I fried a couple of eggs, half a pound of bacon, and finally put 2 slices of bread in the toaster. Breakfast has always been my favorite meal of the day, no matter the time of day. However, I told myself that I would have to settle down, washing down the last piece of egg-soaked toast with beer. I've had too much to drink in the last 2 days, and drinking won't solve my problems. It might make me a little better for a while, but in the long run, it won't do anything. I knew where the anger came from, but it had been many years since I had been able to control it. Now I was that calm guy with the longest fuse I knew. I think Mandy was counting on this. But just like 20-odd years ago, curses flew out of my mouth. My blood pressure rose to record levels, and I lost control, something I promised myself years ago I would never do again. But I had a good reason. I was scared myself when I clenched my fists while arguing with Mandy. I had never hit my wife in all our 28 years together, but at that moment I wanted to beat her to a pulp. I left for both of us. I had to. I drove around the city for what seemed like hours before arriving at my workplace. I was a materials manager at Hubert Manufacturing, a manufacturer of dry cleaning equipment. I worked there for almost 15 years and really loved my job. It wasn't rocket science, and as long as my suppliers did what they were supposed to do, everything was fine. Rarely did I get into trouble, but when I did, God help the son of a bitch who put me in this position. I was fair and expected the truth from everyone I dealt with. If you're going to be late, tell me, don't play games. If I knew this in advance, I could change the production schedule and avoid shortages. But if I didn't know this and had to stop and change models in the middle of work, someone had to pay, and it certainly wasn't me. I had had a pretty good week until Thursday. We have just revised our budget figures for the coming year, and although we beat last year's total by a good amount, this year's budget has only increased by 5%. Steve, if sales continue like this, we'll get big bonuses again this year, said Joel, our production manager. I could see him mentally spending next year's bonus. Damn it, Joel, I haven't yet cashed my bonus check for this year, let alone mentioned anything to Mandy. I just think it's going to be our crazy money, when we want something that we really shouldn't buy. I'll tell her eventually, but not right now. I smiled from ear to ear, knowing how surprised she would be. Will she be mad when she finds out you kept this from her? No. With both kids out of college and now working, this will be a nice surprise after all these years of saving and saving to make ends meet. You might even be lucky if you can still pick it up, old man, he teased me, causing me a lot of trouble. Joel, after 25-odd years, there is no such thing as luck. As for getting up, well, if I can't, there's a little blue pill, so it doesn't bother me too much. We laughed and joked with each other again before getting back to work. It's not that Mandy and I have extravagant tastes. We were a normal, everyday suburban couple whose kids had finally left the nest. Our youngest, Dawn, graduated from medical school last year, and was working at Mercy Hospital. It was something she wanted to do for as long as I can remember. It was uncertain for a while. I thought she would become a veterinarian, but when her friend became seriously ill, she moved in and helped her until she got back on her feet. After that, it's full speed ahead to medical school. She still talks about going further, but right now she wants to put her knowledge into practice. Our eldest, Ronnie, who is only 15 months older than Dawn, also went into medicine, but he chose a different path. He is a field technical representative for pacemakers. When he's not in the lab trying to figure out why one of their machines failed, he's in an operating room somewhere, answering any questions a surgeon might have when installing one of 20 different types of pacemakers. As Ronnie explains, he's not the one holding the scalpel, but he's helping save lives. He enjoys his job and doesn't mind traveling all over the country, especially in the winter when he sometimes has to travel to warmer climates. They are two of the most wonderful children a father could ask for. It's a pity that I can't tell them where I am. Knowing them, they'll tell Mandy, and she's the last person I want to talk to, at least for now. She will understand this sooner or later, but at the moment I had the peace and quiet that I was striving for. I needed time to cool down and think. When Mandy said she waited until after the holidays to talk to me, I knew something was going on. My wife had been acting strange for several weeks, and I didn't know why. Usually the holidays were our time. Between Thanksgiving and New Year's, I was always in a fantastic mood, not to mention that I usually gained a few pounds. She taught classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so nothing much happened during the week. The fall quarter started off like always, but then she really got into it. Heck, on school nights, she would walk around the house humming. Once or twice, I asked her to call and say she was sick, so we could have some fun ourselves. She looked at me and said that she would never do this. Her students depend on her. When she started coming home a little later, she said she was giving extra help to one of her best students. As long as she was happy and didn't come too late, it never bothered me. And then, a couple of weeks before Christmas, she changed dramatically. She seemed tense and had lost all the sparkling enthusiasm I had seen for months. I asked her what was going on, but they told me it was nothing. Bullshit, something was wrong, and she didn't tell me a damn thing. She became moody and began to move away from me. When the term ended and Christmas was just around the corner, I felt relieved. We'll have great holidays and everything that's been bothering her will finally go away. The only thing that didn't stop when the quarter ended was those damn text messages. They came at any time of the day or night with this annoying sound. Finally, I told Mandy to put it on silent. Steve, this is the electronic age. Teachers should at least be accessible by text or email. But not around the clock. Just turn it off. The nights should be ours. She agreed, but without much pleasure. I tried to make this the best Christmas I've had in years. I bought gifts for everyone. Mandy was herself again, so I thought her problems were gone. On New Year's Eve we went with friends. We had a wonderful evening. I love you, Mandy, I said, kissing her as we slowly moved across the dance floor. I don't know what I would do without you. That night I made love to the most important person in my life. I thought that by the time we were done, I had truly finally banished her demons, but I was wrong, very wrong. She waited until after the holidays to tell me. I don't think it's worth ruining everyone's holidays, especially without knowing how I would react to what she was about to say. When she grimly asked me to sit down Thursday night after dinner, a million thoughts raced through my head, and none of them were good. From her appearance, I thought that she was sick and was hiding it from the children and me. Steve, you know I love you, don't you? Mandy said, holding both of my hands. All these years we have always been 100% honest with each other. I don't want it to stop, no matter what happens. Darling, no matter what happens, we can get through this together, like always. Tell me what we're up against, and we'll start from there. She sighed and took a deep breath. Steve, it's not that simple, or rather, it's about someone else. You mean children? Did you tell them first? I replied, a little angry at the prospect. No, not the kids, Steve, someone else. I was puzzled. She seemed to speak in riddles. Mandy, I don't understand. Tell me what's going on. She paused for a moment, tightened her grip on my hands, and leaned forward. Steve, I met someone. She started to speak more, but stopped when I interrupted. Mandy, meet who? What are you talking about? Please post it. He was a student in my evening class last quarter, and we... She trailed off again. I saw beads of sweat appear on her forehead. Steve, things got complicated, and after a while, I felt something for him. Steve, I was so confused. I tried to talk to you several times, but I couldn't. This was not what I thought she would tell me. This was starting to sound like something out of my worst nightmare. Mandy, what the hell did you do? I demanded, trying my best not to lose control. Steve, we didn't do what you think we did, but I really crossed the line with what I did to him. I'm really sorry. I wasn't drunk, but somehow everything got out of control. Mandy, are you saying you slept with someone else? No, I would never do that. 5 seconds passed, 10 seconds, maybe an hour, I don't remember. My brain was trying to process what I had just heard from my wife. He was in my evening composition class, and over the last 4 months, we got to know each other. I'm not sure, but I thought that I might have some feelings for him. I tried desperately to talk to you about this, but I couldn't until I realized it myself. I pulled my hands away from hers and stood up. I took a few steps, but there was nowhere to go in our small kitchen. I didn't know what to do with my hands as they moved towards my head, my arms, and everywhere in between. Finally, it dawned on me what my wife was telling me. Steve, we didn't do anything, physically, until the last night of class. We talked, had a snack, or sometimes had a drink after class. I want to be honest with you. I could always talk to you about anything until this happened. Steve, talk to me, okay? I could not. I couldn't think, much less speak, at that moment. Finally, my growing anger at this new revelation got the better of me. I hit the counter with both hands. I think you should leave. I said this quietly, without visible external emotions, without even looking at her. Steve, I love you. I don't want to leave you. I'm just telling you that I'm confused. This has never happened to me before. She stood up and walked over to where I was standing. She reached out to me, but I pulled back as if I had been poked with a hot rod, and in a way I was. Mandy, for the love of God, please get out of here. Go to your sister or your parents, but please get out of here before I say what I think and ruin our 28 years together. I felt like I was starting to lose control. I felt my rage building. Steve, I'm not having an affair or anything. This drove me crazy, and I finally snapped. For a woman with a college degree, you truly are a dumb bitch. What did you expect? What do I say? Okay, honey, explore your feelings and come back to me when you finally figure it out. Don't you think that dinners, drinks, etc. are cheating on me, so you haven't slept with him yet? My heart is calm. What about holding hands or kissing or whatever else you did? I saw her retreat slightly as the octave of my voice rose a notch. I think the look on your face says it all. I never thought my wife would become anything other than a regular fucking bitch. Steve, I didn't sleep with him. The level of her voice rose for the first time, and I'm not easy to get. Let's see, secret meetings after school and with whom? To hell with the student too. I wonder what the dean of the college would say to this. For the first time in our marriage, she didn't have a quick answer. Mandy, get the hell out of my sight. Leave. I don't care where you go, just get away from me. She didn't listen to what I was saying, but ran towards me, hugging my waist. Steve, I love you, don't you understand? I took her hands off me and abruptly pushed her away. Steve. Mandy, God is my witness if you don't leave. At that moment, I realized that I had raised my hand above my head and clenched my fist. She looked scared. Would I hit her? Honestly, I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that one of us had to get the hell out before I figured it out, and since it wouldn't be her, it had to be me. In one swift motion, I grabbed my jacket and truck keys from their place by the back door. For a moment, I wondered if Mandy was going to stop me. Luckily for her, she didn't. After driving around in the car for what seemed like hours, I finally found myself in my office. Luckily, I had the keys to the office. I walked in, turned on the light, and sadly walked up the stairs to the second floor, where my office is located. On the way, I stopped at the cafeteria, exchanged $1 for change, and bought a cup of coffee. I sat down at the table, holding hot coffee in both hands. It was cold in the building. The heating was on a timer and turned off every night. I was still shaking, but not from the cold. For 4 hours, I sat there and wondered what to do. What the hell was she doing telling me she was dating, and who the hell was he? My anger kept me warm throughout those 4 hours, playing out 10 or 20 different scenarios in my head and finally on paper. All I knew was that I needed to get away and think about what I wanted to do with Mandy. She said she loved me and wanted to stay with me, but her actions didn't show that. At just over 6 o'clock, one of the owners came in. "Steve, what are you doing here so early?" asked Barry. "Couldn't you sleep, or do you want to impress me?" He laughed a little, but when he saw the expression on my face, he stopped. "I haven't seen that look on your face since your father died a couple of years ago." He placed his briefcase on the floor by the door, plopped down on the chair in front of my desk, and told me to lay it all out. I told him everything that happened last night. He listened, saying nothing, until he was sure I had finished. "Leo is aware, and since things are still a little slow this time of year, I want you to take 2 weeks off. Go get your thoughts and feelings in order, because damn, you won't be worth a penny until you do. Let's just say you went to check out a few of our suppliers and leave it at that. Take care of what you need and be ready to return to work by the 28th. I don't want to see or hear from you until then. You and Meng. You'll figure it out, but if you can't, don't make each other unhappy. If you need me, you know where to find me." He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and walked down the corridor to his office. I heard the heating turn on. Barry was a great boss. He and his brother didn't like to micromanage. They let you do your job, but God help you if you don't. Like I said, Barry could be the best boss you ever had or your worst nightmare. If you weren't a company man, you wouldn't last long. After leaving detailed instructions for Leo, I grabbed my cell phone and laptop and headed out. The planet won't stop spinning without me for a week or so. I hoped Mandy had gone to work. She was the last person I wanted to see or talk to after last night and this morning. I turned on my mobile phone and found it full of messages from her. I heard enough last night. I was just grateful that she wasn't home when I got back. I took the beer and went to our bedroom. I threw my suitcase on the bed and filled it with clothes. If she wasn't going to leave, I would leave. One more beer and I was ready to go. I left my personal cell phone on the counter. I had a work phone. I knew Mandy knew this number, but not too many others. I hope no one, especially Mandy, calls it. I thought about making some kind of grand statement by removing my wedding ring and gluing it to the counter with a kitchen knife. But after 20-odd years, it would take more than a drop of oil. I left without leaving a note because I honestly didn't know what to say or even where I was going. Motel 6 in Anoka was clean, cheap, and best of all, there was a restaurant nearby. The burger and fries were good, but the 5 crowns were much better. I returned to my room sometime between 10 and 11 o'clock, having fallen asleep in my clothes. I didn't wake up until 10:15 the next morning feeling sick. I'm not a big drinker. I might have 2 beers a week and sometimes a glass of wine with dinner on the weekends. Now my body was taking full revenge on me. I took a hot shower without bothering to shave. I forgot to take the razor yesterday. Damn it, I had no one to shave for. I ate some pancakes and sausage and drank a few cups of coffee. I thought about going home and dealing with Mandy, but I wasn't ready for it. Looking out the restaurant window at the frozen river below, I remembered our house. My dad and I bought it from my Uncle Ed about 18 years ago to keep it in the family. He was getting ready to retire, moving south, and wanted to get rid of it. The house was not luxurious, rather rustic. Against Mandy's wishes, I took out a loan for our half, and we bought it. She was not an outdoor girl, stating that our money could be better used elsewhere. I did it anyway. My father and I let our family and close friends use it when we couldn't. My kids loved it. Pickerel Lake was not large, but a canal at the very western end of the lake connected it to Cotton Lake, which was, we, or rather the children and I, fished morning, afternoon, and evening. And Mandy, well, she used this time to prepare for her doctorate, which would allow her to teach at our local college, a long-time dream of hers. It worked well for all of us. I didn't sleep much the first night in the cabin. I must have opened my cell phone 100 times before I put it on my nightstand. I missed my wife. I wanted to call her in the worst-case scenario, but I didn't know what I wanted to tell her. Was she trying to attract me in her weird way? Was she trying to get me back? Did she need help finishing it? Or did she tell me that she was no longer happy with our life together, found a replacement for me, and was leaving? I didn't believe the latter scenario, but I was still unsure. Damn it, I wasn't sure of anything right now. Secret meetings, lies, all this tormented my stomach. Even if she didn't sleep with him, it had gone too far. She herself said that she has some feelings for him. My brain was screaming at me. Mandy is my wife. She is mine and no one else's. She wasn't just my soulmate, she and I, we were one, not two separate people. No one, I repeat, no one touches my stuff, and she was at the top of that list. I remember years ago, I was having words with one of her colleagues when his hands began to wander. Touch her like that again, and you'll come back with a bloody stump. He never touched her again. How could she? I was tormented. My head hurt. All I could do was think about it. I remembered my father. I don't want to say that he was some kind of relic of the past, but the word draconian comes to mind. If he had even thought for a second that a man was looking at my mother that way, he would have been dead, or at least remembered the beating my father gave him for the rest of his days. My dad didn't take crap from anyone. I once saw him hit a guy who was trying to take his parking spot. He was tough and had a hell of a temper. I'm not proud of the fact that I most likely inherited this not the best trait from him. My brother and I heard my dad yell at my mom at least once a week, for whatever reason came into his head at the time. It would explode, and then everything would go back to normal until the next time. No one contacted my father or crossed his path. Like I said, my father certainly wouldn't have put his tail between his legs and come here. Right now he would call me a wimp or a weakling, but I wasn't my father, well, at least not anymore. What the hell am I doing here? I can't run from this, I have to fight it head on. I'm her fucking husband, not some damn student who's pouring sweet talk and alcohol into her mouth. We were a team, Mandy, the kids, and me. I spent the whole day thinking and even wrote down what I was going to tell her. The more I wrote, the more I thought, and the more I found cracks in our team. When we met in the mid-20s, we were like two old-fashioned farmers' matches. We rubbed against each other and immediately burst into a ball of fire. She was a slender, sexy machine, and I was more like the quarterback of a football team, but I was much less agile. We always wanted each other. Damn, we almost lived for each other. Neither of us came into our marriage bed as virgins, but we found that we both enjoyed the same things sexually. After trying a few other things, we settled on something we liked and did often. The only problem was my short character and bad temper. I, like my father, started out by not accepting anything from anyone. If you crossed my path, then pay for it. I almost lost my job for telling off one of my employees. I didn't just tell him off, I ate him for breakfast, spat him out, and humiliated him in front of all his co-workers. My boss, who had been watching my little scene, took me to his office. If I see something like this again, you can look for a new job. I want you to go back there and apologize to him in front of everyone. I'm telling you, if this happens again, you can clean your desk. Understood? I nodded and was sent off to correct what I had just done. I didn't think I did anything wrong. Sometimes you have to kick ass to keep your people in line. However, when I started doing this to Mandy over and over again, the real nightmare began. We had just had Ronnie and money was tight. He was sick, the drugs were expensive, and we had almost nothing left in the account until my payday on Friday. When I received 2 cost overrun notices, I freaked out and Mandy got it right. Mandy paid the bills and went over our bill by $10. We had money in a savings account to cover it, but she didn't get to go to the bank because of Ronnie's illness and everything. I didn't care about her excuses and I attacked her. I screamed and screamed like crazy. I think everything that was happening at work and at home finally got to me, and I snapped at Mandy. It was worse than terrible, and when I called her a stupid bitch, she broke down. Tears were already flowing, but after these words they stopped and were replaced by their own anger. She gave me a dressing down, saying that I knew nothing about what was going on in our house, and if I was so unhappy with her, then I could get the hell out. I never heard Mandy swear in all the years we were together. I left in anger and went to a tavern 2 blocks from our house. I'll show her who's boss, I told myself as I drank a couple of beers. Looking at my watch, I saw that a couple of hours had passed. It's time to go back and get an apology from her. But when I returned home, she was not there. The note said that she and Ronnie had gone to her parents' house, and when I got my head out of my ass to call, not to come, but to call. The next day, I settled everything with the bank and even set up automatic overdraft protection to prevent this from happening again. I went to work, and for the first time, I didn't tell anyone off. On the way home, I bought flowers and a card, thinking it would solve our problems, but it didn't. I thought Mandy would be waiting for me at home and was shocked to find that she wasn't there. I assumed she would just forget it like all the other times and we would go back to the way things were before. I quickly realized there was no turning back. "Honey, when are you coming home?" I asked on the phone. "Do you want me to pick you up?" I said in a conciliatory tone. "Steve, I'm not coming home." "Mandy, don't be stupid. Sorry about last night. I know I shouldn't have called you that. Why don't I pick you up and we can talk at home?" "Steve, what about not coming home? Don't you understand? I can't live like this anymore. Tiptoeing around you when you're in a bad mood and then enduring your anger, I can't do that anymore." This conversation started to scare me. "Sorry, okay? I won't do that again, I promise." She didn't buy it. "You've said it before and 10 times before. I do not believe you anymore. Sorry, Steve. I can't live like this anymore. I cannot tolerate verbal abuse. I have to think about Ronnie." "Please, Mandy, I will change," I begged, saying everything to get her to listen to me. Words, just words. They are empty and mean nothing. We need time apart to figure out if we should continue to be together at all. What I heard made my heart skip a beat. "I don't want to hear or see you for the next week. Maybe during this time we will understand whether we want to be together." It was the longest week of my life. My dad told me to go there and drag her home, but the first time I didn't follow his advice. I knew she was right. I could no longer make excuses that I was just letting off steam. 3 days later I called, but she refused to talk to me. I felt lost without her and Ronnie. Heck, I felt like I couldn't exist without her and Ronnie. 8 days later, I showed up at Mandy's parents'. I brought no sweets, no flowers, no gifts, just myself. They didn't invite me inside, but Mandy came out to talk to me. "Well, have you pulled your head out of your ass, or is it time for us to leave? I will not return home to a war zone. You either learn to control your anger, or we're done." I was not above humiliation to save our marriage. "Listen, honey, I know I was wrong to call you that, I admit it. And I guarantee you that this will never happen again. Please just come home with me. You've said this song and danced in front of me before. What's different now?" You have my word. I promise this will never happen again. Have I ever lied to you?" She didn't say anything. We just looked at each other. "Please, I can't lose you, and if I have to beg, I will." She softened. The next 6 months were hell. My tongue kept bleeding from biting it instead of pulling it out, but it was worth it. Mandy was skeptical and watched me like a hawk. She said one more time, and she would leave. I believed her. I had no choice. The only thing she wanted to see was me change, and I proved to her that I could. There were no more flashes. As a result, we became much closer. I don't know what I would do without her. I don't think I would have survived my 20s without her and my children because, as it turns out, we had dawned before we got used to Ronnie. Our 30s were spent raising two wonderful children. I graduated, but as we often joked, Mandy would be a full-time student until she retired. I had several so-so jobs before I found the one I had dreamed of my whole life. It was interesting, well paid, and only 20 minutes from our house. I think one of the best parts of my job was that the owners loved me. After I had proven my worth to them, I could not make a mistake in their eyes. I walked forward with them. When the children started school, Mandy finally got a job teaching English at the local public school. She enjoyed teaching, but sometimes felt frustrated. It turned out that not all students were as interested in learning as others. When she gave someone a C, or, God forbid, a D, it killed her. Parents were called, exams were retaken, and even extra assignments were offered, but sometimes none of the above helped, and someone failed. She took it personally as if she was the one who failed, and yet she gave it 110%. In our 40s, we watched our two children grow up and make so many good choices. I was proud to the point of tears, sitting in the assembly hall, watching them graduate from high school and then college. Heck, even Mandy got her PhD. Imagine, Dr. Mandy Moore, I was married to a doctor. When she received a position at the University of Minnesota, she was over the moon. She was among the elite, teaching students in a place she had always dreamed of. I still made a little more money than her, but heck, we always combined our incomes. We told our kids we would help them with college, but it seemed like we were paying off all their student loans. I didn't really mind unless I found something I wanted to buy and Mandy said we didn't have any money. Even after that incident with the bounced checks, she continued to manage the accounts and money. She knew what we could afford and what we couldn't. I was deep in thought when a knock on the back door brought me back to the present. I opened the inside back door, knowing who it could be. Jesus Christ, Steve, what the hell are you doing here? Art said, looking through our screen door. Come in. I stepped aside to let him into the kitchen. Are you fucking crazy, or has your sweet wife finally kicked your lazy ass out? He chuckled. I did my best to keep the joke going. Just a little time to myself. I haven't been here in winter for a very long time and wanted to see what it's like again. I tried to smile. Well, it's white and cold as hell, but I think you figured that out last night. At first I thought it was your son, but I knew he had more brains than to come here at this time of year. Do you mind if I smoke? He asked, looking around, probably looking for Mandy, who always told him that smoking was not allowed here. Sure, smoke, I said, taking an old coffee cup that he could use as an ashtray. For the next 2.5 hours, I listened to him talk about his life. I had heard them 100 times before, but I let him talk and talk until he finished. He was well over 75, and every year of his life was written on his rough and battered face. He was a man lost in himself, just waiting for God to take him home so he could be with his wife again. Now, in a sense, I understood how he felt. Do you want to come over for dinner? I will have fish. Hell, that's pretty much all he ever ate. Maybe tomorrow. How long are you going to be here? Art asked me. Not sure, but at least until the middle of next week. I hadn't really thought about it until now. Well, then I'll see you for dinner tomorrow, he said, putting out his 8th or 9th cigarette in a cup. Come hungry and bring your own alcohol if you want to drink. I only have bourbon in the house, and I know you hate that shit. Smiling widely, he put his jacket and hat back on. If you want to go ice fishing, I still have all the gear, even though I haven't used it in years. Art, I still hate the cold as much as ever. Do you think I'll really go to the lake and stare into the hole, waiting for some stupid fish to bite? He shook his head, pulled his hat tighter, and headed towards his house. I watched him until he was safely outside the door of his house. At his age, if he had fallen and broken something, he would probably have frozen to death before he could reach his home. I missed dinner. After 6 days, I was no closer to solving my problems than I was on the first day. It was starting to get a little boring, and I started to lose my temper from idleness. I finished everything Mandy wanted me to do for years. I even ended up planning to expand the front deck overlooking the lake and maybe add a few extra outdoor lights. I spent hours sitting in that front room, looking out the windows at my winter wonder. I wish I could say that it helped me understand my problems, but even that kind of thing wasn't enough. The seventh day turned into the morning of the eighth. I finished the last of my eggs and bacon for breakfast. I still had plenty of coffee, cream, and bread, but nothing to add to it. I will need to make several decisions over the next 24 hours about what I want to do. "You're stupid," was all he said as he walked into my little house. "Mandy called last night and wanted to know if you were the hell here." I watched as the ash from the cigarette that hung between his lips fell to the floor. I handed him the cup I had left by the sink. "What did you say to her?" "Really, did you think I would lie to you?" "I told her you have a blonde and a redhead here, and you've been having sex with them all week." He smiled at his own joke. "I told her there was nothing wrong with you and you kept to yourself. And no, I didn't ask her what happened, and I don't care to know. I have enough problems of my own." I knew it was only a matter of time before she found me. "Did she say anything else?" "No, I just wanted to know if you were here. I think that answers most of my questions, but the rest, well, I'm too old to worry about you two and your problems. By the way, just to give you a heads up, there's still over 6 inches of snow expected over the next couple of days, in case you were wondering. If I were you, I'd head south by tonight before the roads get too bad. That is, if you plan to leave. Well, I need to get my truck ready. I don't want to get stuck in the snow." I watched him as he walked back towards his house, contemplating his next move. I closed the house, turned off the gas, water, and turned off the main switch on the electrical panel. I gave Art the remaining food and a 6-pack of beer, which I decided not to drink. He smiled at his luck. "Art, see you soon," I told him on the way out. "Next time, bring your wife. She's much more sociable than you. Just be careful. I don't want to drag your old ass out of the ditch. This will be the day." I gave him a friendly hug, started my truck, and headed out. Where I was going, I wasn't entirely sure, but the last thing I wanted was to get stuck here in the snow. I'd go crazy by the time spring came. As I drove through Detroit Lakes, I got in the right lane, turned on cruise control, and let everyone pass me. It was snowing quite heavily, but at the speed I was going, I had plenty of time to avoid the ditch if I lost traction. Anyway, I needed some quiet before I got to Minneapolis. I still had a couple of days left on my supposed inspection visit, but now that Mandy knew where I was, it didn't matter anymore. I spent the night at a motel near Coon Rapids. It was a bit of a dump, but it had a bed, a TV, and cable, all the comforts of home. Who could ask for more, and for $45 a night? What did I expect? I already knew what I would say to Mandy. Damn it, I think I knew it from my second night up north. I just wanted one more night of rest before heading home. Rest? Who was I kidding? I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the holes in the tiles. At 6 in the morning, I paid the bill and went to Denny's for breakfast. I made quick work of my Grand Slam breakfast and even drank an extra cup of coffee. It was Saturday morning, so I knew Mandy would be asleep. I drove my truck home, and 40 minutes later, I was in my driveway. I thought about using a garage door opener, but it's noisy as hell in cold weather, and I wanted to get in undetected. The house was quiet. I left my suitcase in the hallway and headed to the kitchen. Everything was the same as when I left 10 days ago. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe a sink full of dirty dishes or empty bottles strewn all over the kitchen, but everything looked the same as always. Not knowing what to do next, I made coffee. Mandy used to drink tea in the morning, but I never developed a taste for it. I made myself 3 cups of coffee, standing with my back to the stairs and pouring water from the tap. I did not hear her come down. "Would you like to heat some water for me?" Her words made me jump. She took me by surprise. "Sure, no problem." I took the kettle and filled it halfway before placing it on the already hot burner. "Anything else?" She shook her head. Milk, cream, sugar, everything was within arm's reach of where we sat. As they say, the silence between us was deafening. "Sorry for telling you everything so suddenly, But I didn't know how to do it better, she said, playing with a tea bag in her mug. Nothing. I don't think there was an easy way to say it. My gut twisted again, just like that night and every night after. I want you to know that I haven't seen or spoken to him since the semester ended. She was now looking for some kind of reaction to her statement. Found someone new? She frowned. I think I deserved it, but no, I didn't. We shied away from the main thing, fearing what the other would say or what he wouldn't say in this case. I couldn't stand it anymore. Mandy, what do you want from me? You. Nonsense, you had me, but you were looking for someone else. I wasn't looking. If you keep lying to me, I will get up and leave. This statement made her eyes widen, but there were no tears. Maybe, like me, her tear glands have dried up. This is true. I have never looked for anyone else. It is you who I love. We started talking after class one night, and before I knew it, I was spending at least half an hour or more talking to him every night after class. When he offered coffee or when we had a snack in the student union, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I knew I might have gone overboard when we went out for drinks, but you go out for a beer sometimes after work, and I thought I was just doing the same thing. When I go out for a beer, it's with Joel, Paul, or Dan. I'm not looking for another woman or any other entertainment. I knew it would hurt her, but it was intentional. I wanted her to feel some of the pain I had been going through since that night. Steve, I wasn't looking for someone to replace you. He was just someone to talk to who was interested in what I was teaching. That last statement stung, reopening the rift between us. She didn't consider me her intellectual equal, and maybe I didn't. She never said it out loud, but I felt it at her faculty events in college. These people were smart, but it was book smart. I don't think more than a couple of them could have found their way out of a paper bag. I regret that I said anything at all. So you were going to have sex with him on the side and leave me deaf, blind, and stupid. I didn't have sex with him, she protested, raising her voice. Not yet. For all I know, it could happen sooner or later. It became quiet between us again. Are you going to stay or just take some more clean clothes? It felt like another prick. It seemed like we were now striking each other. I'll stay here tonight, but then I'm not sure. And I really wasn't sure. Steve, I want you to stay. Even if you don't believe me, I really love you. I wanted to say, yes, sure, but I realized that would just start another argument, which I didn't want at the moment. I will sleep in the guest room tonight. Let's see what happens tomorrow. You are my husband. You should be in bed with me. How will we ever get through this if we're apart? Mandy, I don't feel much love for you right now. Okay, sleep in the damn guest room. I have to go to work this morning for a couple of hours. There's a lot of things I didn't do this week because I was worried about you. You should also contact your children. They were worried about you too. She left her mug on the counter and went upstairs to change. During the 3 hours she was gone, I made a list of things that would need to be done if I decided to leave. Don't close bank accounts and cancel credit cards. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Dinner passed quietly. She cooked chicken and rice, but neither of us were particularly hungry. I sipped my glass of wine without saying a word. I wanted to pick her up and shake her and ask her what the hell she was thinking, but I never did. Looking back, I had to do this to get things moving. That night, she watched me go into the guest bedroom again. I didn't close the door. I was still waiting for her to say something, but she didn't. She also left her door open, perhaps hoping I would change my mind during the night, but I didn't. So many didn't do things on both sides led to nothing. By Sunday lunch, the tension could be cut with a knife. We had lunch together, read the newspaper, and even watched a little TV. By dinner time, she finally couldn't stand it anymore. Are you going to talk to me or what? Mandy, what do you want me to say? Steve, you know what I want. We need to discuss this. I need to know if you will stay or go. I have not decided yet. Why are you in such a hurry to get rid of me? What, do you have a date today or something? It was the wrong thing to say. Fuck you, she shouted, heading towards the stairs. There was noise coming from above. Things seemed to be thrown. 45 minutes later, Mandy came down the stairs with 2 suitcases. "If you want to talk, I'll be at my parents'," she said, heading toward the garage door in the kitchen. "For what it's worth, I still love you, but I can't stand your silence or sarcasm anymore." With these words, she walked out the door. There was some delay before she left the garage. I think she was waiting for me to stop her, but I didn't. Good thing tomorrow is Monday and I'll be back at work. It will fill a void in my day and in my life. Barry was glad to see me back, although I told him I hadn't resolved any of my issues. Work is what you need to take your mind off your problems. Just don't overdo it. But I overdid it. There was no point in going home straight after work. I was returning to an empty house. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. I just didn't want to explain anything to anyone, although I'm sure some guessed that something was wrong based on my actions. Mandy tried to email me every 2 days, but I rarely responded, and when I did, she probably didn't like what I wrote. This went on for weeks. I didn't always have a burning anger, but I often exploded for no apparent reason, and more than once I had to apologize to my colleagues. I knew I needed to get my head in order. Every day it became harder and harder for me to function without Mandy. Inside, I felt only emptiness. How this depression crept up on me, I have no idea. Alcohol treatment was probably the start, but when I stopped drinking, the depression remained. Mandy and I tried to talk. It's mind-boggling that after 28 years, we couldn't talk about what needed to be talked about, even though we had so much to talk about. "Dad, you have to wake up," my son told me for the 10th time. "Mom's worried about you. We all are. You need to get back together and figure it out. Stop being so stubborn." My son didn't understand. "Ronnie, if your girlfriend told you that she was spending time with another guy, how would you react? If she went to dinner with him and had drinks with him behind your back, what would you do? Finally, if she confessed that she has feelings for him, would you still be so understanding?" This time, he didn't have a quick answer for me. "But we're talking about Mom. You've been together most of your life." "Ronnie, that's why this is so hard to accept. I'm tired of explaining my reasons to him. Dawn understood me more than my son, but she was also on Mandy's side to some extent. You know, I think Mom is just going through menopause. Her hormones are probably out of whack, and she didn't fully understand what she was doing. I told her to get tested because with a few medications, she'll be able to control it. You know, that she never slept with him, right? Dawn, if she slept with him, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, would we? Listen, I told Mom that she was wrong, but that you would forgive her. Is there anything else you want to tell her from me?" I started to get a little angry at my kids. "Both of you should stay out of my life. Take care of yourself, and I'll take care of myself." "That's the thing, Dad, you don't do it. You look terrible, you're losing weight, and Mom is in terrible shape too." I was almost glad that I wasn't the only one falling into the abyss. "Honey, we'll either work it out or we won't, but you two need to stay away, okay?" She looked at me with hatred. "Well then, I guess we'll just let you wallow in your pity. Call us when you're done." It went just as bad as my meeting with her brother. Antidepressants prescribed by the doctor helped me get through the next 2 months, or so I thought. I walked around in a fog and sometimes couldn't remember what day of the week it was, let alone the problems that had brought me to this point. Mandy and I haven't spoken for the last couple of weeks. I think she finally got tired of chasing me around and extending an olive branch. Slowly, she began to remove her things from the house. I did not care. Damn, I was happy that I found my way home every evening. "Steve, take this," Barry said, handing me the piece of paper. "You have an appointment with your therapist at 2 o'clock today." "What is this?" "This is your appointment with your therapist." "I don't need to." I started before he interrupted me. "Look, I don't pay people to sit at their desk and do nothing, which is exactly what you've been doing for weeks. Either go to a meeting and get yourself cleaned up, or start looking for another job." He didn't give me any more concessions or options. "Okay, I'll go." "Okay, Maybe we can get back to normal business sooner rather than later. Dr. Simon Cohen had the identity of the stone. He was a professional, all about business, and I didn't want to see how much Barry was paying him. We spent the first 2 sessions discussing my first conversation with Mandy and how I felt about it. How do you think I felt? Like crap. That's how I felt. My damn wife cheated on me behind my back after 28 damn years. I started to get angry again. Did she have sex with this man? She said no, but now I don't know if I can trust a word she says. Has she ever lied to you before, to your knowledge? I don't think so, but damn it, I had no idea what she was doing for, 4 months. I'm probably a good candidate for the blind and stupid award. He didn't find it funny. Steve, do you want to go back to your wife? I think that's the $10,000 question now, isn't it? I still love her. I just don't know if I can trust her, among other things. We spent the next 3 sessions discussing all this other stuff. Do you want to invite your wife to these sessions? Asked me the next week. Dr. Cohen, Mandy doesn't even know I'm seeing someone. Well, I'd like to hear her opinion on this, if you don't mind. It might give me some insight into your problems. I took a piece of paper from the side table and wrote down her work email address and cell phone number. If she wants to come and see you on her own, I have no problem with that. But I'm not ready to date her yet. I thought you said you were starting to get over the situation. Doc, starting is the key word here. I'm off the meds and finally starting to understand my problems. I've lost 2 months somewhere. I need to get my head in order before I start worrying about Mandy. Dr. Cohen and I spent the next 2 sessions discussing Mandy and our last 10 years together, wondering why I thought my life was so perfect. To everything I told him, he either asked a why question or made some other comment. He was never satisfied with what I told him. When he asked me to write down all my problems on paper, I thought it was a waste of time. It wasn't like that. It took me 5 terribly hard days to do this. I felt like a schoolboy. I started writing on a notepad, but after throwing away more than 20 sheets of paper, I moved on to our home computer. It went much easier because there was a spell check. I'm one of the worst spellers I know. When he asked when I would finish, I told him to give me a couple more days to reread it because it was much longer than I thought. There were too many things going through my head, and I wanted to make sure I accounted for them all. I saw your wife yesterday. He began our next session. She asked me to tell you that she misses you. Well, I miss her too, but after you read this, you might wonder why, just like I have over the last couple of months. He looked puzzled when I handed him the 3 printed pages. I'll read this, Dr. Cohen said, pointing to my typed pages, and maybe we'll discuss it in our next session. I nodded in approval. I left feeling worse than when I arrived. I thought we were a team, but after all the thinking and writing, I now have my doubts. For the first time since Mandy left, I wasn't sure we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. Boring, that's what I became, and that's what our marriage became. In our late 20s, with young children, we had little or no time to ourselves. How we found time for love, let alone sleep, is still a mystery, but we did it. We always found time for ourselves. At 30, I realized that I had become the primary parent. Scouts, soccer practices and games, dance classes, and all other activities became my responsibility. Mandy worked, studied in the evenings, and had little time for anything else. My kids and I became a team. Don't get me wrong, Mandy attended every event she could, and I didn't think much about it until recently. That's just how it was. Our 40s were supposed to be ours. The kids went to college and life became less hectic. We still made love, but I was always the initiator. Friends became either hers or mine, but not our common ones. We both attended each other's events. After all, that's what husbands and wives do, right? As they say, with a partner, you always have a date for Valentine's Day and New Year. Mandy didn't particularly like my friends because many of them were a little rude, and I had little in common with her arrogant group of professors who made it clear that I wasn't up to their level of intelligence, or at least that's what they thought. Gatherings with my friends were usually backyard barbecues or adult parties. Alcohol flowed freely, and because of the language and conversations, children were not allowed. These were basically guys' nights with our wives serving us food and drinks. They were good sports because the boys cooked and cleaned while the wives chatted, or rather exchanged notes. On the way home, I learned all the gossip about everyone. Overall, I thought we had the best marriage. Gatherings with her friends weren't as fun. There was plenty to drink and the food was good, but I felt like I had to walk around with a napkin under my chin while I ate or drank. I guess what I mean is that everyone and everything was civilized as hell. They talked about current events and had big debates about various issues, usually about things that didn't interest me. When someone asked me what I thought about the Iraq War, I said something stupid that made everyone look at me, and not in a good way. I think we should nuke Iraq and make one hell of a gaslight that can be seen from space. It was a joke. Apparently, no one understood my humor. My friends would have laughed, but like I said, I had no connection with her friends. Over the past 2 years, I don't know which of us stopped inviting the other to work or university events, but it happened. Looking back, we were growing apart, and I don't think either of us noticed or cared. When she was dropped off home a little tipsy after one of her meetings, I should have said something, but I didn't. Then there was the time I forgot to tell her about a company dinner and came home very late, and she didn't even ask where I was. Like I said, looking back, the warning signs were everywhere, but no one paid attention to them. The day after I gave Dr. Cohen my list, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't like what I saw. Middle-aged, slightly overweight man with thinning hair, and when did I get these wrinkles? I became sedentary and bored. The only thing Mandy and I talked about now was unimportant little things or the kids, never about what either of us was thinking or what was going on outside our four walls. We used to talk about the news, current events, our work, but I can't tell you the last time we asked each other about something other than the kids. At night, I watched TV for hours, and she read. We were in a rut. I tried a couple of times to spice up our sex life. It didn't go the way I expected or planned. I bought her a pair of sexy nightgowns for Christmas last year. She wore one of them that night, but I never saw her in them again. Steve, I'm a 47-year-old woman, not some hot 20-year-old girl. I look and feel stupid in these outfits. I think she gave them to our daughter. When I tried a couple new things in bed, she sat up and asked where the hell I learned this. When I said that I saw it in a video, she asked if I needed adult films to make love to her. I didn't try anything new anymore. I remember a night about 7 months ago when we had just gotten home from dinner and she wanted to talk. This happened right after I kissed her and told her I loved her. What exactly do you love about me? She asked. I stood there a little stunned. You always say that you love me, and I don't doubt it for a second, but what is it about me that you love so much? I'm certainly not as pretty as I once was, and this 47-year-old body is starting to sag already for a long time. We like the same dishes, but I hate hunting and fishing, and camping is also not at the top of my list. Even our views on many issues differ, as I said. I don't see what it is that you like so much. This was the first time I had been asked such a question since we started dating. This took me by surprise and confused me. I took a minute or two to think about my answer. Because you are you. I don't agree with you. I think you're beautiful, and you still have a hot body. It's not a 25-year-old's body, but I don't think my 48-year-old body could keep up with a 25-year-old's. Really, we don't always see things the same way, but we agree on the issues that really matter. We've raised two wonderful kids, and I'm looking forward to being a grandfather one day, but I think the biggest reason is that you're just so easy. I can be myself without worrying about being judged for who I am or am not. When I look at you, I see the woman I married all those years ago, and I still feel happy that you said yes. I want to hug you, kiss you, and make love to this 47-year-old body because you still turn me on. I saw that she was somewhat surprised. So if this conversation is over, I think it's time to show my wife how much I love her. With that, I took her hand, led her to our bedroom, and did my best to show her what she truly meant to me. I'm not sure, but I think we've reached new heights. I certainly have. We fell asleep together before finally being separated for the night. I hoped I had eased any fears she had that night, but apparently I was wrong. I don't think she was intentionally distancing herself from me, but I noticed it even more now that I thought about it. As I waited for my session with Dr. Cohen, I kept returning to that fateful night. I don't know how many times I replayed Mandy's confession in my head. Sometimes it felt like it filled my every waking minute. I thought about my initial shock and anger, figuring that I shouldn't be too surprised by its intensity, given that I had been caught off guard. Perhaps she was tired of our boring lifestyle and wanted a change. More than anything, what she said that night struck me to the core. I probably could have handled it better, but at that moment I felt hurt, betrayed, and, above all, angry, and I still am. I hoped Dr. Cohen would get what he needed. I know I got it. After writing all this down, I fucking opened my eyes, and, believe it or not, I felt a little better. As the professionals say, it was a cathartic experience. We talked about my family, especially my father, and my other relationships during my youth and adolescence. I waited almost 40 minutes before finally saying something. "Doc, what about what I wrote? My list, what do you think of it?" Another damn question answered with a question. "You made me write everything down. My problems, my feelings, the whole ball of wax. Don't you have something to say about it?" He looked at me for a few moments. "This was done to give you an understanding of yourself. We can't solve anything until you understand what your real problems are, and I think you're starting to understand that now. I want you to write a diary of your life. Write down your emotions, thoughts, everything that affects your life. We can view them or not, it's your choice. See you in 2 weeks." That's how that session ended. I was stunned and confused. I followed his advice. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I worked, ate occasionally, but mostly I was pounding away at the damn keyboard. I poured my soul out onto this stupid screen. My wife and children still insisted on talking to me, but I had a mission. As far as I understand, Mandy has now seen Dr. Cohen too, and according to Dawn, she never in her life thought it would go this far. How stupid does she think I am? Finally, we get to the point. Finally, we discussed my problem list and my journal. He asked me what I had learned. "A lot," was my quick answer. I realized that there had been cracks in our relationship for many years that I simply did not notice. Looking back on my life, I was happy, but now I understand that she could not be. I think it was only a matter of time before she started to spread her wings. Now the question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to reconcile with your wife or go in a different direction? "Doc, if she's not happy with me now, what's going to change in 6 months?" Couple therapy can be very effective in these cases, especially since it hasn't come down to sex. Also, given the number of years you've spent together, it may be exactly what's needed at this time. Even if this is the case, there are issues and events that I still cannot overcome. Steve, healing takes time. You can't expect to wake up one day and find all your problems solved. However, if you both work at it, I'm sure you can resolve your differences. I wasn't so sure about it. "Steve, write Mandy a letter explaining all your worries and problems. Tell her why you are not together. Perhaps this way you both will see where the real problems lie. This may give you a starting point to begin the healing process." Over the next few weeks, I tried to follow his advice. I wrote a letter to Mandy and kept adding and changing it. I never sent it to her, but in hindsight, I probably should have. Once a week, I would get an email from Mandy asking when we could talk. "I hope soon," was the only answer she received from me. Our life went on. Work is almost back to normal. People stopped asking about Mandy. I went to a company summer picnic alone, staying long enough to eat and do social circles before leaving. Mandy emailed me and asked if I wanted to go with her to a social event at the college president's house. My quick response to her was, "What do you think?" I thought to myself. What was she thinking? At our next session, I conveyed this to Dr. Cohen. It took me almost 5 weeks, and I spent $100 on professional editing, but I think it was worth it. "Steve, what is this?" That's the explanation why Mandy and I aren't together. He looked at the papers I handed him. I'm also working on two other things that are bouncing around in my head. He looked a little surprised. I never expected. I guess you took my words seriously. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled too. Everything was laid out in black and white. In print, no less. You see, my good friend Carla introduced me to a professional editor after I got up the courage to let her read what I had written. I needed someone to read this because I was on edge and needed feedback. Did you write this? Carla asked after finishing reading. Until the last word. Bullshit, Steve. I've known you most of my life, and there's no way you could do this on your own, at least not on your own. I proved her wrong. She took 2 steps forward. She edited it and then sent it to the magazine. When I received the letter 3 weeks later, I knew none of my friends would ever see it unless they were bored to tears while sitting in the doctor's or dentist's office. I certainly didn't intend to draw their attention to this. I was more than a little proud of myself considering the content and the number of hours I put into it. I wanted to submit it under a different name or just anonymously, but they told me that wasn't allowed, so I used the first letter of my first and last name. The first call I received was from a teacher friend who I hadn't seen in a couple of years. It was one of Mandy's former colleagues. Steve, this is Becky Sanders. I know it's been a while, but I have a magazine in my hands and I want to clarify something, if that's okay. No problem, but I already know what you're going to ask, and the answer is yes. I told my husband it was you. I think congratulations are in order. I listened for a minute or two before telling her I had to leave and thanking her for calling. I took the phone off the hook. What I gave Dr. Cohen was a short story about my life, starting with the night of Mandy's confession. I must have rewritten it 50 times, and by the time I had read and reread it 1,000 times, I could repeat it word for word. I thought it was perfect, it had to be, but the editor still made a dozen changes before he was happy with it. On Thursday evening, just before 8, I turned on my cell phone and saw that I had 15 messages, 4 of them from Mandy. Perhaps tomorrow I will answer them. I wish I could say I slept peacefully that night, but I didn't. My mind didn't want to turn off. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about something else, and most of the time about Mandy. Finally, I got up, watched some TV, then went back to bed. This time it worked, only now it was 2:45 in the morning. All I wanted was to get through Friday afternoon without any meltdowns. I planned to spend a quiet evening at home alone, with a grill, a 16-ounce steak, and a bottle of wine. It almost happened. Not bad at all, was all Barry said on the way out. Did Mandy read this? I tried to play dumb. Steve, I'm not an idiot, and besides, my wife gets every magazine known to man. Given the numerous messages I've received from her, I have to say yes. I'd like to be a fly on the wall when you finally talk. Have you made any decisions? I shook my head. Well, keep me posted and get out of here before anyone else finds out. He shouldn't have asked me twice. On the way home, I bought a bottle of wine. It was not the New Yorker, but a well-known local literary magazine. They didn't pay me $1 million to publish it. The fact that they said it was good enough to print made it all worthwhile. My soul, my life, and my being were laid out in these pages. People will read it for its literary value, but a select few, those who really knew me, will see it for what it truly was, my plan to reconcile Mandy and I. I felt a slight sense of guilt airing our dirty laundry in public, but everyone who knew us already knew there was a problem, even if they didn't know exactly what it was now they knew. I turned off my home phone because I didn't want to be disturbed that evening. My copy of the magazine was open on the table next to my plate. I kept glancing at him while I was eating dinner. I could make it a little shorter if I wanted. Most of the story was just background and supporting details. Hell, there were only a few paragraphs that told the story of the events of that terrible night. That's what I could write in one short essay, or rather, exposé. I heard everything that night. The half-truth is also something she hasn't bothered to share with me all these months. There were no real reasons, just excuses as to why or what happened. There were regrets, maybe even a few tears for effect, before she finally said that things weren't as bad as they seemed. Well, in her opinion, anyway. It was not the young, handsome man who overwhelmed her 47-year-old legs. Rather, he was a middle-aged man, married, with too much free time and an itch to do something about it. They were just talking. She said he was smart and genuinely interested in what she taught. They talked, they laughed, they developed an emotional connection, giving him what was rightfully mine. All of her friends and colleagues were highly educated and, not to sound rude, also condescending snobs towards anyone without a PhD. I tried for years to fit into their society, if only for the sake of my wife. Constantly feeling like I was being looked down on only deepened my disdain for their arrogance. When she mentioned that her new friend was highly intelligent and interesting, I felt a knife slide between my fifth and sixth ribs. A part of me died that night. She became just like them, her dear friends, her PhD colleagues. I waited for months. The word love was still said along with the phrase, I really miss you, but I never heard what I was looking for. Phone calls have replaced text messages. Finally, emails became our only form of communication. We became a disconnected couple, disconnected from each other. Through her actions, I became detached from my own marriage. My family needs were simple. I just wanted her. My wife's needs, on the other hand, became categorized, sorted, and prioritized. Did they ever include the real me? We weren't clones of each other. We were never inseparable, but I believed that what we had was special. We connected on every level, or so I thought. Silly me, maybe I was wrong and didn't see it. Still, I waited. This never happened. A highly educated woman teaching communication skills, and she missed it. How, I'm not sure, but she missed it. So I wrote it down on paper. Maybe she'll see this and finally realize what she's missed all these months. Is it too late for us? I'm not sure. It will be more difficult than it would have been, say, 8 months ago, but the fire is still burning, although it is getting dimmer every day. And if, when it finally goes out, I will regret it, even if she doesn't. You see, I'm not the kind of emotionally detached person who can say, we had a good run while it lasted, and go on my merry way. I will grieve and bury what we once had. Then I will get up in the morning, take a deep breath, put one foot in front of the other and move on, if not for anything else, then at least to prove to myself that I am still alive. It doesn't have to end this way, but it probably will. I guess I didn't mean that much to her because after all, like the title of this little story, she never said she was sorry. I felt my stomach tighten. Every time I read it, I felt the same lost and empty. I still wanted Mandy with me, but now on my terms. I didn't use our real names in my story. In fact, I didn't use any names, but those who knew us well enough didn't need names. As I said, my friends would never read this, not because they weren't educated, but because no one I knew subscribed to literary magazines. The Mandines, on the other hand, probably either subscribe to them or read college copies regularly. On Saturday, I slept late until almost 10:30, which is practically a new record for me. After a leisurely breakfast on the terrace, I called my kids. They both attacked me for not returning their calls and demanded a full report. They didn't like what I said. Dad, you and Mom should be together. I can't imagine you being apart. Dawn bombarded me until I promised her I'd call Mandy this week. Ronnie continued to argue that I was being stubborn, agreeing with his sister that his mom and I should be together. Deep down, I agreed with both. I told them that I would try to do a better job of returning their calls in the future, but whatever happened between their mother and I would be up to the two of us to decide. On the one hand, they understood where I was coming from. On the other hand, they made it clear to me that any decisions would still affect them. They were absolutely right. It was obvious that they had not seen the article. I pottered around the house, watched a movie on Netflix, and went to Tony's for dinner around 7 p.m. I was bored. I'm used to having a partner, my wife, next to me. Even if we didn't talk, she was still there, and I missed that. Lying in bed at night, I watched her quietly read. I could touch her, see the corners of her lips turn up as she told me it was late and time for bed, before returning to her book. A light kiss on the lips meant the end of our evening, after which I fell asleep, still facing her. Sometimes I would wake up, look at the clock, and ask why she wasn't asleep yet. "I only have a few pages left," she usually answered. "I fell asleep again. I missed this," and much more. On Sunday, I took my mom to brunch. She was talkative and wanted to know absolutely everything. She said that I had lost weight and that I needed to come more often. She never mentioned Mandy by name, but kept talking about my situation, which she hoped would soon be resolved. Knowing my mother, I knew this must be killing her inside. I took her home and asked if anything needed to be done around the house. She said no. We talked, or rather, she talked for another hour, and then, after kissing her, I left. Now what? I spent the rest of Sunday on the computer adding and editing another story I started that I thought was pretty good. Barry came into my office Monday morning. "Good weekend?" "Surprisingly, yes," I told him. "Okay, maybe you can find a way to speed up production of the KZ 1500. I sold 2 more than we have in stock." I told him I'd see what I could do. At the end of the day, I stopped by his office and told him that the 2 devices would be ready by the end of next week. He smiled, holding his dirty old pipe in his teeth, which he had never lit. Nice to see old Steve again. At 11:15, I received a call on my mobile. "Steve, this is Dr. Cohen." I recognized that dry, monotone voice without waiting for him to introduce himself. "I was wondering if you could come to a meeting at 3:30 today. I'm not booked in until Thursday. Is there a problem?" "Your wife asked me to call you to see if you could come to her session scheduled for today." "Why didn't she call me herself?" "She said she called, but you didn't answer her calls." He was right. "Did she say what she wanted to talk about?" I asked, knowing perfectly well what I was talking about. "No, only that she would like you to be there if possible." I didn't have anything planned. "Sure, why not? Tell her I'll come." "Thanks, Steve. I think this is a step in the right direction." I wasn't so sure. My stomach immediately began to clench. I drove slowly towards Dr. Cohen's office. When I arrived, I looked at my watch and saw that I had 10 minutes left before my meeting. So I sat in the car, looking out the window and repeating over and over again what I had been rehearsing for the last 2 months. I saw Mandy drive up and quickly enter the building. Looking at my watch, I saw that I had 5 minutes left. At 3:28, I got out of the car and headed inside. I was thinking about going in, fashionably late, but that's only suitable for social events, and this definitely wouldn't be one of them. His secretary told me to go straight ahead. They were waiting for me. "Dr. Cohen, Mandy," I said, greeting them both while internally deciding where exactly to sit since there weren't many options in his office. I chose the chair directly opposite Mandy. "Glad you joined us, Steve," he said. Mandy continued to look at me. "Why don't we get started? Mandy, you asked Steve to come. Why don't you tell him why?" "I think Steve knows what I want to talk about." "How could you?" "How could I?" I answered immediately, pretending not to understand. "Write what you wrote. Everyone I know and work with has read it. Why the hell did you do that? Isn't it well written? If it wasn't, they sure as hell wouldn't have printed it in their magazine," I said, now looking at her. "Now everyone knows my personal affairs." "Our personal affairs?" I corrected her. Dr. Cohen intervened at this point. "Mandy, was that accurate?" "Not completely. I didn't have an affair. I started a friendship with one of my adult students that went a little further than it should have." "Jesus Christ, Mandy, the way you describe it, it sounds like you asked him to be a friend on Facebook. Let's tell Dr. Cohen about holding hands and kissing and everything else, okay?" The anger returned like that night. I started talking faster and much louder. Mandy leaned towards me and shouted back, "What is all the rest? Nothing like that happened. Why can't you believe it?" Dr. Cohen intervened immediately. "Please turn down the volume. We all understand there was a problem." "There's a problem," I added. "Okay, there's a problem," Dr. Cohen corrected. "But without talking about it, we won't get anywhere. I tried to talk to Steve, but he won't open up. He ignores me." "Is this true, Steve?" I see her lips moving, but nothing new comes out. Just the same shit I've been hearing since the first night. It seems like it's everyone else's fault except her. I'm tired of all the lies and excuses. Finally, why don't you tell me the truth, or I swear to God I'll leave here forever. Finally, I said what I wanted to say. There was about 20 seconds of absolute silence while we all waited. Dr. Cohen started to say something, but Mandy interrupted him. I said it was inappropriate, I don't deny that, but it never went as far as you imagine. There was dancing, kissing, and when his hands went too far, I stopped it. I never gave him pleasure, and didn't go to bed with him, no matter what you think. Steve, I didn't mean to replace you, he was just, well, interesting. And good-looking, I added, not knowing what he looked like. And handsome, she agreed, looking at me. What was more important to me as a teacher was that even though he was getting good grades, he wanted to be better. So he thought sex with a teacher would help him achieve this. I added sarcastically. Anger flashed across Mandy's face. Dr. Cohen took control again. Steve, please let Mandy finish. You can speak when she's finished. He looked at Mandy. Please continue. Like I said, Rick wanted to be better, so after class we would go through his work in detail. I would show him his weak areas and discuss what he could do to improve them. At first it only took a few minutes, but then it became longer and longer. We soon discovered that we were closing, so we went to the student union and had a snack while we continued our discussions. I didn't see anything wrong with it, and of course I wasn't looking for adventure, as you so colorfully described it in your story. Within months, we became kind of friends. This comment made me chuckle evilly. Steve, was all Dr. Cohen said. Sorry, but it's getting a little deep here. Steve, nothing inappropriate happened. When he got A's in his next 2 jobs, he invited me to Murray's on campus to celebrate. There were a million other people there. We only had 2 drinks, max, and we danced a couple of times. That's all. Then Mandy, when did all these loving feelings start to develop? I was getting impatient and tired of waiting for her story to be told. Steve, I wasn't talking about love, I was talking about feelings. Mandy, you're mincing words. Steve, we kind of became close. Then we started talking about things outside of what was going on in class. We talked about our lives outside of class, and it kind of grew. But please understand, I'll say it again, I never did not have sexual relations with him. When was this supposed to happen? A week, a month, or after we talked that night? Steve, I wanted to be honest with you. Maybe I shouldn't have. I felt something for Rick that I shouldn't have felt, and I was torn. Steve, you were the only man in the last 28 years that I felt this way. I was confused and scared for the first time. I needed your help. Help? What help? I still don't understand what you wanted from me then or even now. The only advice I would give you is to end it before it goes that far. Listen, it was something new and exciting. It was like a high school crush. It was just talk. But when I realized that Rick wanted to take it to the next level, I was scared. And like I told you, I was done this. Mandy, nothing happens for nothing. Even when you tried to explain it to me twice, you said the same thing. He was smart and handsome. Are you implying that I'm not? Steve, I never said you weren't smart or handsome. Not in those words, but I've been feeling it for the last couple of years. Your arrogant friends were always hinting at it, and they finally convinced you of it. They must have been shocked that I wasn't a complete idiot after all. I'm enjoying this part more than you can imagine. But at what cost, Steve? Now everyone knows about our affairs. So what? Why do you care? My friends will never read this, and yours, frankly, don't care. I felt like this session might not go the way Mandy had hoped. Mandy, is there something you want to say to Steve? Steve, I thought I already told you this, but I guess I wasn't clear. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I started, for how it affected you, and I ask for your forgiveness. She sat quietly, waiting for my answer. Steve, is there something you want to say to Mandy? Of course, Doc. Mandy, why are you sorry? What was missing from our marriage that you had to look outside for? I don't think I can move forward until I know why. Mandy tried again to say that she didn't look for anything and didn't do anything. I woke up. When you can honestly answer these questions, I will talk to you again, but not before. I'm tired of hearing that nothing happened. For Christ's sake, if nothing had happened, we would still be living together. When will you understand that you cheated on me? Maybe not physically, but you put him in a place where only I should be. Until you admit it to yourself, we have nothing to discuss. At this point, Dr. Cohen reminded me to reflect on what I had learned from my lists and journal entries about the real state of our marriage. Mandy, it seems like we just stopped paying attention to each other. I don't know why, but I can't get past that night to even begin to think about how to get our marriage back. I don't know what I want now. I just know that now I need to get out of here before I explode. Dr. Cohen, I'll see you on Thursday. I felt an overwhelming disappointment in this room for all three of us. We were at an impasse, and I knew it was because of me. I just didn't know what to do about it. I just knew that at that moment I needed to leave. Before anyone could say anything, I left. I would have liked to hear what was said after I left, but it still wouldn't have changed anything at that moment. I spoke my mind, but again got nothing. On Thursday, Dr. Cohen wouldn't discuss what he and Mandy talked about after I left. Steve, this is Dr. Patient Privileged information. If you want to know, you can always call Mandy and ask her. I didn't intend to do this, Dr. Cohen continued. After what I've heard from both of you, it seems to me that you have a lot of insecurities in yourself and in your relationship with Mandy. Add to that the fact that you also feel threatened by what you think she saw in Rick, and we have a lose-lose situation here. I thought about his words for a few seconds and then pushed them to the back of my mind, far away. I told Dr. Cohen what I was going to do. Let's say I'm moving on with my life and leave it at that. I'm happy with what I've done so far. I need to start taking care of myself. Are you saying you're giving up on your marriage? No, but it seems like Mandy has given up. Until she realizes she did something wrong and why, we can't move on. If anyone was my soulmate, it was her, but not anymore. We became two different people, and I'm sorry to say that what we had no longer exists. I didn't fully believe it, but deep down I wanted my share of revenge with a little humiliation to boot. I'm sorry to hear that. You know, Steve, every relationship changes over the years. Marriages have their cycles and sometimes take on a life of their own. You're not the same person you were in your 20s or 30s. That doesn't make you better or worse. What I'm trying to say is that even though your relationship with Mandy isn't the same as it was before, that doesn't mean it has to end. I think I remember Mandy saying she was sorry, she was trying to explain how it all happened, and I believe that you know the reasons. You have driven her into a corner, and no matter where she turns, she cannot get out. It may be true, but I can't move forward. Every time I close my eyes, I imagine them together. It makes me angry and sad, and I feel bad inside. I don't know how to stop being angry. What do I know? It's that I need to do something to take care of myself. Haven't you learned anything from your notes and our time together? I thought I learned. Apparently, I'm not ready to let go and forgive yet. I just need more time to understand this and move forward. I don't know what I want from Mandy or myself. I just know I'm not getting it, not from either of us. Dr. Cohen cleared his throat and turned to me again. Well, only you can make that decision. We used the remaining time discussing what I had decided to do, and although he didn't agree, he understood. See, I've finally decided what I'm going to do. I was going to do nothing. If she wanted a divorce, she could initiate it, because I wasn't going to. The only thing I was going to do was start separating our lives. I canceled all of our joint credit cards and split our finances in half. I wasn't sure what to do with the house, but this conversation was bound to come up sooner or later. I kept the same cell phone number, but opened my own data plan. Within 4 or 5 hours, everything was done. 2 lives lived as one, became separate and independent. Dear Mandy, I began my letter to her, explaining in detail what I had done and why. We're at different levels now. I don't see how we can go back to what we had. I rewrote it many times, but in the end it always said the same thing, just a little differently. I told her that I was trying to find a way to forgive her and wished her well. But deep down, I am not the same person I was 8 months ago when this all started. When I finally hit send, I began the grieving process. No drugs or alcohol this time, I went into it blind. My 2 children called me 2 days later and told me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I told them I wasn't arguing with them, but it was my mistake, and yes, they finally read my story. I'm not saying what she did was right. You laid out these elegantly written rules and steps and presented them to the world, but you never sent them to her. She had to read it in a magazine like everyone else. You told me so, I objected irritably. Steve, I told you to write her a letter and send it so she would understand where you are, not tell the whole world about the problems in your marriage. Weren't you angry when you said Mandy cheated on you? Hell yeah, I thought she was sick or something the night she told me. Well, how do you think she felt when she read your story? That night, Mandy trusted you, no one else. Your little show included the whole world. How do you think it made her feel? Warm towards you? Or humiliated, angry, hurt? And finally, did your little trick work again? I slowly shook my head no. Steve, I think that light went out the day you left that session with her. My stomach clenched. That night, I reread my story again. Everything I wrote was carved in stone. Dr. Cohen was right. I did not take any blame for what went wrong in our marriage. As he said, I was perfect and Mandy was imperfect. These were not instructions for reconciliation. These were demands and conditions that ended in her submission to all my desires. I didn't give her the slightest chance. It became obvious that I should have taken a closer look at what I posted and what I said. That night, I sent her an email asking to talk, but she never responded, just like I hadn't responded hundreds of times before. Every other Sunday, Dawn, Ronnie, and I would have dinner together somewhere. We used this time to find out how each other was doing. That evening, when Ronnie brought his girlfriend Carrie, I realized that something was going on. He finally proposed, and she said yes. We had to help organize the wedding. They tried not to mention Mandy unless I asked a specific question. Looking back, I guess it became some stupid, unspoken rule between us. Have you seen your mother recently? I asked over dinner one night, hoping to get some information about what she was doing. Sometimes, Dawn answered shortly. What does she look like? I haven't seen her in God knows how long. She looks good, is the short answer again. I felt like I was playing the 20 questions game, so I left the topic while Ronnie, Dawn, and Carrie looked at me. What? I finally had to tell myself. It seemed to me that they were looking at me for the 10th time that evening. You know Mom will be at the wedding, of course, Ronnie reminded me. I would hope so. You are her son. What are you trying to say? What was said next was more painful than I could have imagined. I think she'll bring a boyfriend with her. Don't tell me it's that bastard Rick, I said too loudly. They fell silent. Bitch, Jesus Christ. This time I didn't care who heard me. If she brings that bastard, one of two things will happen. I'll personally bury him in a grave, or he'll bury me. Got it. All three of them watched me go crazy in the middle of the restaurant. That asshole ruined my damn marriage, and now she wants to bring him to my son's wedding. If he comes, I won't be there. I'm not going to jail because of that bastard. I was so angry that I was shaking. Look, I need to leave. When I stopped screaming, they tried to say something. I just couldn't listen to another word. I angrily threw in enough money to cover dinner and left so quickly that they didn't have time to say a word. If I had wine at home, I would drink it all and drink myself into unconsciousness. Instead, I hit a couple of walls, skinning my fists in the process. At least now I knew what Mandy was doing. I tried to tell myself that I didn't know why this upset me so much, but I knew I was only fooling myself. I still cared about Mandy, and my anger was just an outlet for the pain I felt inside. We were still legally married, but it was only on paper. We lived different lives. I didn't even know where she lived. I wonder if Rick left his wife, or if he's just dating Mandy on the side. Then I got angry again. I felt my father's old anger return. Mom said if you can bring one of your new bitches to Ronnie's wedding, she can bring whoever she wants, Dawn told me over the phone Monday night. Honey, who said I was bringing someone? Honey, I don't have anyone. I'm not dating anyone at the moment, and even if I was, I wouldn't bring her to Ronnie's wedding. It has to be our family time. Dad, why don't you just call her and figure it out? I've never seen people as stubborn as you two. I could hear from her voice that she was pretty disappointed with both of us. I already told you if he comes, I won't be there, and that's final. I was stubborn again and gave everyone interested an ultimatum. Would you miss your only son's wedding? Dawn asked, not believing what she heard. Instantly. If she hadn't cheated, we'd be going to our son's wedding together. Next thing she'll want is for that asshole to sit at the damn head table and toast the bride and groom. God, how I hate that woman. Easy, Dad, don't get started again. You have no idea what Mom is doing or with whom anymore. And if I'm not mistaken, Mom was the one who wanted to come back, and you basically told her to go to hell. And how much time has passed? 11 months. You would think that in all this time you would have let go of all your anger and learned to relax a little when her name comes up. When you give almost 30 years to your husband and he starts cheating, only then can you tell me to relax. God, it almost sounds like jealousy and that you're still in love with her. I had nothing more to say to her, so I remained silent. Oh God, you're still in love. Mom knows. Why the hell didn't you talk to her? Oh my God, now I understand why you're always so damn angry. Dawn, I have to go. I'll call you later in the week. I studiously avoided answering her question and hastily retreated, leaving what I know was a stunned Dawn behind. The week after that call was terrible. Dawn and Ronnie both said I should be at the wedding, no questions asked. What the heck? That stubborn side of me showed its ugly face again. Damn them all. Let Rick pay for my share of the wedding. By Friday night, I was in a real raging mood, and the worst part was I had a date. I almost called it off, but decided I'd go crazy wandering around the house, and my hands finally healed from my last outburst. I had to cancel. I spent the whole night talking about Mandy and Rick, and it ended up breaking up the date after only a couple of hours. Fortunately, my companion put an end to this around 8 o'clock in the evening, throwing her napkin on the table in disgust. When you want to see me without the ghosts of your not-yet ex-wife and her new boyfriend, call me, but not before. And don't worry about taking me home, I'll call a taxi. That's how stupid I am. There was a month left before the wedding, and I still hadn't tried on my tuxedo. Ronnie was unhappy with me. He again told me to stop being so stubborn. Have I mentioned my stubborn nature? I wrote Ronnie a big check and gave it to him the following Sunday at dinner. This should cover my share of the wedding expenses, I said, handing it over. You'll come, right? No, but I'll be there in spirit. I can't even type what he said to me after that. He left the restaurant in a rage, shortly after tearing up the receipt and throwing it in my face. Well, I said. Dawn shook her head indignantly. I realized that she was completely disappointed with my behavior and made it clear to me. You're going to ruin your own son's wedding, do you understand that? All you have to do is show up, have a good time, and finally shut up for a while. Do you know how to do that? I can't, honey, I just can't. Dad, Mom said she's coming alone, do you hear me? She's not bringing anyone. Why don't you just call her and tell her how you really feel? I know exactly what she'd like to hear from you. It doesn't matter anymore. Look, I haven't seen your mother since we last went to Dr. Cohen. I thought we had a chance, but between the two of us, we destroyed what was left of our marriage. I loved this woman more than my life, and I think it would kill me if I saw her again, knowing that she was with the guy who ruined our marriage. What I said next surprised even me. I guess this feeling gradually grew inside me. And even if he's not there, she's not mine anymore. Instead of helping solve our problems, I just pushed her away. Now I understand that. I should have been the one to say I'm sorry, but now I can't. Again, I'm stuck and can't get out of the hole I've dug myself, so have a wonderful time and please tell Ronnie not to be mad at me. I love him, I really do, but I just can't do it. After my confession, I saw tears in Dawn's eyes. I knew there were tears in my eyes, too. Daddy, please, she begged, but I no longer had the strength to fight. I mailed another check to Ronnie. He could have torn it, but at least I wouldn't have seen it. Then I started planning my activities for that Saturday. I wanted to be as far away from Minneapolis as possible. I took Friday off, filled up my truck, and headed north Thursday night. It was late, dark, and cold when I arrived around midnight. There were no lights on in Art's house, and mine seemed more like an inhospitable grave. By 1 a.m. I was unpacked, warmed up, and holding a glass of wine in my hand. To the dumbest bastard in all of Minnesota, I said, toasting myself. I finally understood it clearly, as if for the first time. If I hadn't come here last time and instead gone straight home and worked things out with Mandy, I wouldn't have to hide here again from myself and everyone else. 2 more glasses of wine and I went to bed. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was replay the last year over and over in my head. I was wrong, I wasn't right, but sometimes being right doesn't solve your problems. It didn't matter anymore. I was lonely and I hated it. Art waved at me the next morning, probably wondering what the hell I was doing here again. At least there wasn't 10 feet of snow this time. I brought my new laptop, and although I had 3 unfinished stories to work on, I just sat on the porch, looking out the window. It was calm, but sad at the same time. On weekends, I made a habit of not wearing a watch. It was my time, and since I didn't have a specific place to go, I didn't want to know what time it was. So there I sat, with a bottle of my favorite wine as my only companion, looking out the windows at the birds eating the birdseed. I must have dozed off. My chin hit my chest, and I woke up. It was starting to get dark, and my legs were cramping. "You're finally awake," said a voice behind me. "You can still sleep anywhere and in any position, right?" I recognized the voice and thought that I must still be dreaming, but as I sat up, I realized that this was not a dream. She stood at the kitchen table, still wearing her jacket. "I could take everything in this house, and you probably wouldn't wake up anyway." She smiled at me. I looked at her, shook my head to come to my senses, thinking that this was a waking dream. Finally, I turned completely towards her. We were probably 25 feet apart, but it felt like a mile. "I see that nothing has changed. You are still the silent person you have become over the past year." She came closer. "I understand that you won't go to our son's wedding. Is there a special reason?" I couldn't speak. I just sat there looking at her. God, I was pathetic. "I also heard a rumor that I want to confirm," she said, approaching me. "Someone said that you still have feelings for me, hate, love, or something in between. Is that true?" She kept coming closer until I finally got my legs to move. Like 2 matchboxes, that's all I can say. After our lips met, we exploded into a ball of fire. It seems that the temperature in the house has risen by 30 degrees. I had my bride, my wife, in my arms. Everything was blurry. Something clicked inside me. Our clothes must have caught fire and the ashes fell to the floor as we moved around the bed, changing positions perhaps a dozen times over the next 2 hours. We didn't say a word, letting our lips do the talking as our bodies became reacquainted. Lord, I was in heaven, praying that this was not some nightmare from the depths of my subconscious or the consequences of drinking wine. Exhausted, tired, and starting to freeze, we crawled deeper under the covers. It wasn't a dream. Mandy snuggled even closer. "I thought you were coming here, and Art confirmed it when I called him this morning. I'm glad I have a front-wheel drive car, otherwise I never would have made it here. You could have called and I would have met you. Steve, you haven't answered my calls in months. I couldn't risk it, not this time." She was right, I probably wouldn't answer this time either. "Now that I've caught you, let's talk." My stomach began to clench. "Can't we go back to what we were doing and talk later?" I kissed her deeply. "We can come back to this later if you still want, after we've sorted out some things." My palms began to sweat and my mouth became dry. "What do you want to drink? I think we have a long conversation ahead of us, I asked. I grabbed a bottle of wine from the veranda, water from the refrigerator, 2 glasses from the kitchen, and jumped back into bed. Mandy has already put on her t-shirt. I took a long sip of water before handing the bottle to her. I poured a glass of wine for us, placed the bottle on the nightstand, and prepared myself for what she had to say. "Well, I'm ready," I said, taking a sip of wine, expecting her to attack me. As she propped up her pillow to look at me, I felt like Gary Cooper standing outside at noon. But then she smiled. "First of all, you're going to your son's wedding whether you like it or not, and that's final. I rented you a tuxedo, and even though it might be a little big, you're still going. I don't want you to regret it in 5 years. About missing it. I know Ronnie will be disappointed if you aren't there on his special day." "Okay, I'll go. Are we done now?" I said, putting the glass down and reaching for her. "Mister, we've just begun," and she was right. We had a conversation that we were supposed to have 10 years ago. "Steve, I was wrong for what I did. I crossed the line, and I'm very sorry. However, if it weren't for Rick, it probably would have been someone else. My body wasn't right, and I felt old. A faded woman that no one wanted, including you." I started to protest, but she stopped me. "I already know what you're going to say. Please, just listen for a change. I know that's not true from your point of view, but from mine it is. We became like our parents. We stayed at home most of the time, doing what old people do. We fell into a routine, and it wasn't just you." When Rick showed interest, I felt excited for the first time in a long time. My creative juices started flowing again, and I felt energized. I didn't see where it was going. I just went with the flow and enjoyed the ride. When it went beyond the classroom, I had to stop it. I wasn't going to let it get out of control, so what was the problem? She took a long sip of wine, kissed me, and took a deep breath. The first time we danced, I knew I had crossed the line. It wasn't just about school stuff anymore. The second time we danced, he kissed me. I didn't stop him because he caught me off guard, and it was over before I realized. When Rick drove me back to my car at college, he kissed me again, and again I didn't stop him. When I realized that my blouse was partially unbuttoned and he was trying to get under my bra, my brain kicked in. I told him it would never happen again. My emotions were on a roller coaster that wouldn't stop. I felt so bad about what I did that I cried the whole way home. Should have happened again, I would have made sure that this didn't happen. The next week after class we talked, and it wasn't about some stupid job. He told me that he had feelings for me and he wanted to develop them. My stomach shrank even more into one solid lump. Mandy looked me straight in the eyes as she told me what happened, and now she had a worried look on her face. "Mandy," I started to say, but she stopped me. "Steve, please let me finish, because if I don't, I may not have the courage anymore." I nodded, watching her search for the right words. "Steve, I wasn't looking for a replacement for you. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But here is this cute guy telling me that he's falling in love with Mimi, a woman with falling self-esteem, a woman whose hormones have taken over her body and not in better side. I was someone who no longer felt attractive, wanted, or sexy." She raised her hand. "I know what you're going to say, but let me remind you again, this was what was going on in my head. I was flattered to say the least, but as God knows, what I just said was what happened the most. I told him that I was a married woman and there was no way in hell I would leave you, but he didn't care. He wasn't going to leave his wife either. He just wanted a little love on the side." My anger began to rise. "I should have beaten the shit out of that bastard the first night," I said in a voice full of hate. "And what difference would it make? You could have ended up in prison, and it wouldn't have solved any of the problems, and probably would have only made the situation worse. I wasn't going to leave you for him. Damn it, what kind of woman do you think I am? But don't get me wrong, I fantasized about what it would be like to be with another man after all these years, but that's all. It was a stupid fantasy in my hormonal mind. That night I realized that we have a problem. If I even considered his proposal, then we had a problem in marriage. It's true, I had some kind of perverted feelings for him. A what? Even I wasn't completely sure. All I knew was that I needed to talk to you to solve a problem you didn't realize. She stopped, finished her glass of wine, and started drinking water. I think she's dry from all the talking. I once thought that you would come to the rescue, everything would work out, and we could go back to the way things were before. Now I understand that this will not happen. Looking back, I probably could have handled it better that night, but I'm still not sure how. I messed it up, and it got out of control. Steve, I'm so sorry. I was looking for a lifeline to save our marriage, and all I did was drive a wedge, who tore us apart. There were tears in her eyes. I pulled her close to me, kissing her head as she cried. I held her tightly, kissing her hair as she let out her feelings. The cracks in our marriage became so great that we both fell and became lost in a maze of emotions. That night, and in the months that followed, I became my father again, and not the man I should have been. Sometimes she stopped for a couple of seconds, but it was only a temporary lull. Our eyes met, and everything began again. Her tears soaked my left shoulder and flowed down my chest. Honey, let's take a break for a minute. I need to put on a shirt and go to the restroom. Do you need anything? Only you. I smiled and headed to the bathroom. I couldn't think. My emotions were racing through my head at full speed, but I needed to empty my kidneys. The floor was cold, and without a single thread of clothing, I felt the cold even more. A quick rinse, some mouthwash, and I was back in bed. I kissed her deeply, trying to show her how much she still meant to me. Mandy smiled. I'll be back soon, she said, running to the toilet. I walked over to the heater and turned it on high. There's no point in freezing. Mandy dove under the covers, clutching at me for warmth. She looked at the heater. It's on full blast. She smiled, knowing that I had read her thoughts. I had a question bouncing around in my head for a long time, and although I might not like the answer, I needed to know. Have you ever slept with Rick? I didn't shout it or demand an immediate answer. This was not said in a confrontational tone. Rather, I turned her body towards me, looked her straight in the eyes, and asked my question. No, like I told you before, and I'll tell you again, I swear to God, I never slept with Rick. I never saw Rick outside of class again after that night. I wasn't going to let him ruin our marriage, and I wasn't going to another woman ruining someone's marriage, no matter how bad it was. I can't say I didn't think about it, but it never happened. And for some reason this time I believed her. Having finally allowed myself to believe her, the 100-kilogram weight that had been pressing on my chest all these months seemed to collapse to the floor. My brain screamed, yes, yes, there is a God. But looking at her, I just smiled and kissed her on the lips. I wanted her in that moment more than ever in my life. In my thoughts, we won. Even with my t-shirts on, I made love to my wife, and it was wonderful. Damn it, words cannot express the emotions I felt at that moment. I brought her back to where she belonged to me. Even though she had said the same thing over and over again months ago, I was so caught up in my emotions that I couldn't find a way out. With Dr. Cohen's help, I realized our marriage was in trouble, but I couldn't overcome my own problems. I chose the wrong actions, thinking I was doing the right thing. I turned to Mandy, looked her straight in the eyes, and confessed my shortcomings and pathetic behavior. Mandy, I'm here with you, swallowing my pride and telling you how sorry I am for the way I acted that night and continued to be so stubborn and wrong all these months. You needed me and I let you down. I promise, I swear to all that is holy, I will never be such an asshole again. I blamed you for all the problems in our marriage. I forgot that there are two of us in this marriage. If you can find forgiveness in your heart for me, I know that we can. To restore what we had and make it even better as we go on with our lives. By the time I finished speaking, tears were streaming down my cheeks. She didn't answer, she just looked at me, smiled and hugged me tighter, kissing away my tears. We both cried as we renewed our vows on that huge bed. I kissed every square inch of her body, claiming it as mine again before we finally had to stop. My 48-year-old body could only withstand so much time, and I exceeded that limit twice. We need to take a shower, and if we want to make it to the wedding on time, we better hurry, she told me. I somehow forgot about the wedding while we were doing other things. I don't want to leave this bed. Don't worry, there are other beds in other rooms, and I hope God will give us the opportunity to relight each of them. But now we need to hurry. She was right. Art waved us goodbye, yelling for us to come back again when we could stay longer. Personally, I hope to never return here alone again. Next time, I will come here again with my family. I followed Mandy all the way to Minneapolis, right into my driveway, talking on my cell phone most of the way. Your tuxedo is on the bed. Pretty confident, aren't you? I said hesitantly, not knowing how she would take it. I'm not sure, but I was hoping. We can talk about this and everything else later. I need a shower and I need to get ready. We have to be at church in 2 hours, and I'll need all that time. So if you don't want to be late, go ahead. Let's hurry up. I showered downstairs and let Mandy get ready upstairs. I don't understand why a woman takes so long to get ready. I showered, shaved, brushed my teeth, combed my hair, and got dressed in 45 minutes. Mandy was still fiddling with her hair and makeup. When I tried to touch her breasts, I was kicked out of the bedroom. I went downstairs, grabbed a beer, and turned on the TV. Well? Mandy asked as she posed in her mother's groom's dress. My breath froze in my chest just looking at her. Don't screw this up or you'll regret it, whispered a voice in my head. You look beautiful, it takes my breath away. The bride will be green with envy when she sees what you look like. Smart man, you're finally learning, she said, picking up her purse. We have plenty of time to arrive and make a spectacular entrance. She was smiling from ear to ear. We held hands all the way to church. I love you, she said. Kissing my hand, I smiled, taking my eyes off the road. Steve, she screamed, and I turned my head sharply. I crossed the center line and was going in the wrong direction. No more holding hands and keep your eyes on the road, she said, fanning herself. Damn, I don't need that kind of worry. We reached the church safe and sound. I opened the car door for her, took her hand, and helped her out. After that, her hand did not leave mine all night. Ronnie was delighted and surprised, and Dawn, well, let's just say that she and Mandy had their own private thing. The wedding went off flawlessly, and there were many surprised faces visible in the queue for the reception. The food was good, the band was too loud, but after I gave them $50, they played slow songs every time my wife and I hit the dance floor. I made a toast to my son and his new bride. I hope you will be as happy as you are now in 50 years. Everyone joined in the toast and drank their glasses of champagne. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, my son came up to me. Dad, I have a million questions, but I'll leave them until I get back from my honeymoon. Carrie smiled and swayed from side to side. She drank more than she should. Don't worry, Dad. We're not driving. See you in a week. And with that, they left. After they left, the celebration began to die down. An hour later, Dawn and several of her friends were loading gifts into the truck. The caterer packed everything else. Nice wedding, I said, sipping my soda, still holding my wife's hand. I spun her around, put my hand on her waist, and started dancing. Steve, the group is gone. We can make our own music, I said, pulling her closer and moving like we had done hundreds of times before. Mom, Dad, I'm leaving, Dawn said, leading her 3 friends away. After we deliver the gifts to their apartment, we're going out for drinks. Do you want to join? Not today, honey, I told her. I'm not as young as I used to be, and it's been a long day. Have fun with your friends, but not too much, okay? Don't worry, Dad, I don't drink or drive. Good girl. Now, if you don't mind, I think we'll leave too. Dawn and Mandy exchanged one last, knowing glance before we walked out of the hall to the car. Can you drive the car? Mandy asked. We can get a room here if not. I've been drinking ginger ale for the last 2 hours. I'm as sober as a judge. The ride was quiet. We were both lost in our thoughts. She didn't ask, and I didn't say where I was taking her. I think at this stage we both somehow knew. I drove her car into the garage next to my truck. She pulled out a small bag of things from the car, and we headed inside. "Do you want to talk tonight, or should we wait until tomorrow?" I asked Mandy, standing in the kitchen, neither of us knowing what to do next. "Tomorrow. I'm really tired right now. I think we both need to get some sleep, unless you want to spend the whole night." "No matter how much I want it, I choose to sleep." "What, are you getting old?" She laughed. "I'm not getting old, but a lot has happened in the last 48 hours, and we'll both need clear heads tomorrow." She agreed, and we trudged upstairs. As we walked past the guest room and glanced at each other as she continued walking, I got my answer. Mandy took all the necessary things with her in a small bag. She used the bathroom, put on a t-shirt, and climbed into bed with me. There were some small kisses and my hands roaming her body a little before we settled in for the night. My brain didn't have time to start thinking about the woman in my arms because my body took over and put me to sleep. 1,000 needles pricked my arm as I tried to remove it from Mandy without waking her. I did it so gently that she just rolled over and continued to sleep. I lost my arm, hoping that the blood would begin to circulate faster. I put on jeans, a sweater, and slippers before heading down to the kitchen. I needed coffee. I brewed 3 cups and filled the kettle with water for Mandy when she woke up. A little hazelnut-flavored cream, an ice cube, and I enjoyed my first cup of the morning. I was happy to have her here with me, but also scared about this morning. The sex last night was much better than it had been in years, and the wedding was fun, but today was a real Sunday afternoon. Was it just a fun stop? A night of passion that was just a glimpse of what we had and what we lost? These and a million other questions raced through my head as I asked myself what I really wanted. I had just finished my second cup when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. A pair of sweatpants hid her body from me, which was for the best. "Did you heat the water for me?" "On the stove now," I replied, turning on the burner under the kettle. "Do you want something to eat?" "Not yet, maybe later. I'm still a little full from last night's dinner," she said, pulling the chair next to me away from the table. "The wedding was beautiful. Carrie is such a sweet girl. She will make Ronnie happy." I smiled, knowing she was right. The whistle of the kettle broke the impending silence between us. She took a cup and tea bag from the cupboard and looked into the refrigerator. "No milk." "The closest thing we have is coffee creamer." She frowned. "Then some sugar substitute." After taking everything she needed, she sat down next to me again, still playing with the tea bag. "Well, who will start?" "Why don't you start since you've already started the conversation?" She stopped, took a sip of tea, and frowned. I hoped that it was because of the bitter taste of the tea and not because of me, and I began to speak. "You already know how it all started. There's really nothing to add. Rick knew how I felt about you. He wanted someone on the side, and I told him I wasn't going to be his toy, especially if he wanted to stay married and all that. He already knew that I wouldn't leave you for anything in the world. I don't know what with some guys, do they really think that their wives won't notice that something is happening?" "I didn't know," I said, inserting my naivety. "Steve, I didn't cheat on you. I would never do that." "Then I don't understand why you continued to communicate with him." "I didn't continue. Like I said, I told him I would never leave you, and we can only talk about school, and that's it." "But you said you would bring him to the wedding," she smiled. "I never said I'd bring Rick. I said I'd probably bring a beau because I thought you'd bring someone. You were the one who assumed it was Rick. Hell, I didn't even talk to Rick since classes ended." I was completely confused. If it's not Rick, then who is it? "I could probably find someone. I've dated a few guys, but like you, I'm not seeing anyone at the moment." My brain still wasn't following her. "Steve, let me get this straight. If you had brought someone, I would have found someone to bring. Do you really think I would come alone when you have some cutie on your arm? For God's sake, a woman has her own pride. When I found out you weren't bringing anyone, it made everything a lot easier." "Why didn't the kids tell me? They let me know you were bringing Rick." "Steve, if you remember, you were just crazy. You didn't give them a chance to get a word in edgewise." Thinking back, she was right. But Dawn said, Dawn told you the truth, you just didn't listen. Then you said you wouldn't come because I'd be there. Never in my wildest dreams did I think you still had feelings for me. You didn't want to talk to me, and I finally began to understand what I needed to do next without you. I decided to wait at least until the wedding to make the really difficult decisions. Mandy, what I said was true. I really missed you, but it wasn't until Dr. Cohen and I talked that I realized our problems started years ago, not months. Steve, I'm not some hot chick with a long list of suitors trying to win my hand. I'm 48 years old, and I'm happy to have at least one man in my life. My body is still playing with me and will be doing this for the next few years, so you'll have to live with it if we're going to be together. I laughed. It's not funny. As men age, it's simple. You gain a few pounds, your hair starts to thin and gray at the temples, you get a mature look, and among all the single women, you're still a great match. Women just get old, that's all. So if you're still looking for an old woman who's ready to get attached, I think I'll be a good fit. I leaned down to kiss her. You're not old, and I still think you're hot. This brought a smile to her face again. So, how many women did you have while I was gone? Hell, that was a question I was hoping to put off until later. How many men have you had in bed? Was my immediate response. We both looked at each other. Let's just say sex without love isn't that great and leave it at that. I agreed. This was the last time anything was said on this topic. Almost 3 weeks passed before Mandy finally returned to the house. We met with Dr. Cohen 2 more times and then stopped. We both finally knew what we wanted. The night she returned, I took her out to the terrace to talk. Mandy, I want to thank you for being a better person and taking the lead while I continue to act like my father. I promise you that I will do everything I can to make our life together better, to be that husband you deserve and cherish you for as long as our lives last. Mandy looked at me, pulled me towards her, and hugged me tightly. The children were aware of our progress, but did not express their opinions. They knew we needed to figure it out ourselves. It took time and many conversations to understand when it all started and what we could do to prevent it from happening again. Mandy was adamant when she told me that our marriage was out of the question if I wanted to pursue my writing career. If you write anything else, it must be fiction, understand. And if you need someone to edit it or need a different perspective, you have a college professor to help you. I didn't have time to write or do anything else for almost 6 months. We spent most of our evenings together discussing or planning our future. Do I think her friends and colleagues are arrogant asses? Of course they do, but at least now they're talking to me instead of at me, which is a big step in my recovery process with them. 8 months later, I found out I was going to be a grandfather. It was another chapter in my life that I couldn't be happier about. I felt fulfilled and happy with where my life was going these days. In June, I took a week off, and the whole family went to the cabin. Art watched as a convoy of cars and trucks arrived loaded with construction materials. After 4 days, the deck was almost twice the size, and there were now enough streetlights that it was almost like daytime at night. We started planning to spend some time at the cabin during the winter. Ronnie even talked about bringing 2 snowmobiles. On the last morning, when it was about 6 o'clock, the sun had barely risen, so I walked out onto the front porch. My mind started to go back to last year, and half a year my stomach started to clench. "Come back to bed," a voice whispered behind my ear before I felt warm lips on my neck. I turned around, smiled, put my arm around her, and walked back to our bedroom. "You'll have to be quiet, you know. Steve, we're all adults. It's not something they've never done." "But what kind of children want to know that their parents are doing this in the next room?" I said quietly. "Let them get used to it. Luckily, we're still young enough to do this, and even if we weren't, I'd make enough noise that they'd think we were doing it." "You know you're evil, don't you?" "Let's wake up the kids," Mandy said, pushing me back onto the bed. When did she become so outspoken? I thought her moans were reflected from the walls of our bedroom. Someone or something must have turned it on. I just hoped it was me. A quick thought flashed through my mind, and I smiled. I wonder if Dawn still has those outfits. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.